It's spring, and with spring has come a lot of crazy weather. A major ice storm hit northern Michigan this past week. There's been heavy rains. There's been warm weather. There's been cold weather, snow, just everything that you seem to get in spring in Michigan. And that has led me to think about a spring going back to 1854. And in the words of David Ward, one of his legendary timber cruising operations that took place around Otsego Lake in the March and April of 1854. So today, on this special episode, I thought that I would read to you from David Ward's autobiography, his experience in doing some timber cruising along that area of Otsego County, Crawford County, and what led to be part of his huge pine holdings in that part of northern Michigan. So stay tuned with me on North Country History with Rob Berg to hear about David Ward's legendary timber cruising efforts. So settle in, sit back, and enjoy the episode. North Country History with Rob Berg, your podcast on the forest history of the Great Lakes region. As we learned in the last episode about DeWard, named for David Ward, and the efforts of logging his estate after his death, he was one of the great pine lumber barons in Michigan in the 19th century. This started off as him being a landlooker or timber cruiser for other men, for other lumber companies. And as part of his payment, he would be able to take some of the land that he looked at, about 1/4 of the acreage, as his own payment. And that allowed him to kind of build up an amount of timberland for him to later log off. But sometimes he went off on his own and did timber cruising. And the story I'm going to tell you today is one such episode that he did in 1854. And he was aided in this through the money from other lumbermen, the Dwight Smith and Company and William A. Howard, who were lumbermen in Detroit, but they also operated a bank that financed lumber operations of others as well. So I'm going to read a little bit today about this activity that he did in 1854. So here we go. During a considerable part of the winter of 1853 and 54, I was again land surveying and subdividing sections into 40s for Francis Palms. During this winter, John Mellon informed me that in company with another man some years before he had traveled from Sheboygan through the unbroken forest to Saginaw, some 160 to 70 miles, following a part of the way the north and south town line between ranges 3 and 4 west. In so doing, he said he'd passed from 1 to 1.5 miles west of Otsego and Bradford lakes, and that on traveling on a ridge west of these lakes, he had passed through several miles of good cork pine, and also through other good cork pine about 2.5 miles southeast of where the village of Frederick now stands. Mellon's opinion was that there could be found and selected a large area of cork pine in the vicinity of the above-mentioned localities. After studying the subject with a map, I concluded to go into that region, which comprised the headwaters of the upper main branches of the Au Sable and Manistee rivers. As I had $3,000 of my own to invest, I chose Dwight Smith and Company and William A. Howard, who were running a private bank in Detroit, to furnish the additional necessary money to purchase the pine land I might find and select. I learned that the Soo Canal Company had also information of the pine in this region and were prepared to send landlookers when a spring opened. Addison Brewer, a very rugged, hardy, competent, persistent woodsman, landlooker, and United States land surveyor, was appointed to manage their exploring expedition. I learned the date the Soo Company expedition was to start, it being from the 5th to the 10th of April, depending on the opening of spring weather. I engaged 3 men to go with me to pack sufficient provisions to last 2 of us the necessary time to explore and select the desirable pine land, while the other two, on reaching our destination, would return to Saginaw with light packs. We left Saginaw City after a big thaw with heavy packs on the 16th day of March, 1854. The man whom I chose to remain and explore the land with me when on the ground was double-fisted, stout, hardy, willing, determined, and well-drilled by prior expeditions, John Baily. He carried his 100-pound pack with a rifle and axe in his hand from Saginaw to Bradford Lake without lessening the weight of his pack and without a murmur through the whole distance of 165 miles. We first traveled on the ice up the Tittabawassee River, past where Midland now stands to the Tobacco River forks, then through the forest to Houghton Lake, which we crossed on the ice to Higgins Lake, crossing that also on the ice, and then went a little east of north, passing over the Jack Pine Plains some 8 miles beyond the Otsego River, then north through the forest, the snow being 3.5 feet deep on level, to Bradford Lake, which is 2.5 miles south of Otsego Lake. Here my 2 extra men unloaded their packs of provisions, except what was necessary for their return, and started back, leaving John and me there alone. The weather turned severely cold after a heavy thaw on the 19th of March and remained so until the day we reached Bradford Lake, the last day of March. The sky during the whole of this time was clear and the wind continuously northeast, the thermometer falling at times to 30 degrees below zero in the middle of the day. From the 20th to the 30th of March, the cold was so intense that all the way to Bradford Lake, not one of us broke through the crust formed on the snow by the recent thaw. We camped every night 20 rods to one side of our trail, and by neither breaking or cutting anything on the trail, the Soo Canal folks did not discover that anyone had gone in ahead of them. I froze one of my big toes in crossing Higgins Lake. Otherwise, no misfortune occurred to us on our trip. The evening we reached Bradford Lake, the wind turned south, accompanied by gushes of warm air, so that by 5 o'clock in the afternoon of April 1st, the snow level had lowered fully 2 feet. The wind then changed to the west, and it froze lightly that night. I selected on April 1st some nice cork pine on the lot's west side of Bradford Lake. The morning of the 2nd of April found us camped on the southeast end of Otsego Lake, about where the Smith-Gratwick sawmill now stands. From this point, a tract of some 9 miles of cork pine along the west side of the lake and beyond was the finest and most extended that I have ever saw. The view of the opposite side of the lake was mostly hidden from our sight by a point of land extending into it, but what we could see was also timbered with tall, beautiful pine. You can little appreciate the exhilaration of our feelings and spirits at the sight. All this pine had now been lumbered off. With courage and zeal, we methodically labored to look out and select the pine timber on the goodly land we had spied out. The snow was from 18 to 20 inches deep, with a crust which often bore us up in the morning, but on its thawing a little each day towards noon, we sank deep in the snow at each step. It froze slightly again each night. During our 3 weeks of labor in looking up and selecting this pine, and while expecting the Soo Canal people would soon be in the region and discover our tracks, we put our best foot forward to accomplish the work before us, which at times quieted our enthusiasm, but never discouraged us. We found a cheat survey and consequently had to chain at times. John's rifle brought us no fresh meat, as we only killed one small bear, and that was on our way out. No deer were in this region at the time, but plenty of bear and beaver. On completing the selection of 16,000 acres in Township 29 and 30 north of Range 3 and 4 west of the best quality of cork pine, and feeling uneasy as to the doings of the Soo Canal people, we lightened our pack by throwing all of our provisions away except sufficient to last us on our journey. And on the 21st day of April, we started on our long march south. On the first day of our march out, about 2 miles southeast of where Frederick now stands, the snow being still some 16 inches deep in the forest, we crossed the Soo Canal Explorers Trails, which quickened our steps. We camped that night a little north of where Grayling now is. Starting bright and early the next morning, and there being no snow on the plains, we rapidly crossed them, reaching and camping that night at the inlet of the Muskegon River into Houghton Lake, which runs south from Higgins Lake. While traveling that day on the southeast shore of Higgins Lake, we suddenly spied on the trail ahead of us 2 men carrying heavy packs. Suspecting their mission as provision packers for the Soo Canal folks, we met them and inquired the route of the trail to the mouth of the Tobacco River, informing them that we came from Grand Traverse Bay and were on our way to Saginaw. They kindly showed and explained to us on their map the creek's curves and the destination of the trail we were to follow to the mouth of the Tobacco River, where they said they had left their canoe drawn out and turned over in the bushes to cover the provisions they had left. On the morning of the 22nd of April, at the first peep of the morning birds, we were up constructing a raft, crossed the Muskegon River at its outlet into Houghton Lake, and passed on our way around the southeast shore of that lake, camping that night on the headwaters of the Tobacco River. The morning of the 23rd, we were up ahead of the birds and were off as soon as daylight came on our little trail towards the mouth of the Tobacco, camping that night after a severe day's travel. We were also off early on our trail on the morning of the 24th and arrived at the mouth of the Tobacco at 12:30 p.m., having traveled in that half-day 21 miles by a trail through the woods. We soon found the packers' canoe turned over their fresh provisions, and capturing a sufficiency of the latter, we ate heartily, increasing thereby our mental and physical strength. We covered up the remaining provisions with old peeled bark, and at 1:00 p.m., with canoe, paddles, and setting pole, we started down the Tittabawassee, a distance of 50 miles to Saginaw. John's stout arm that had often pulled up the Penobscot did its best work that afternoon, while my hands and arms continuously plied the paddle at the bow of the canoe. At 8:00 that evening, we reached the hotel at Saginaw City, where we had, on our way up, left our Sunday clothes, having come down the Tittabawassee River in the canoe to Saginaw, 50 miles by the river in 7 hours. On reaching Saginaw City, I started directly for the livery stable to engage a team to take us through to Flint that night, while John went to our hotel with our packs and ordered supper. Our supper being eaten and our Sunday clothes put on, we left at about 9:00 in the evening in our livery rig for Flint, 33 miles away, at which place we arrived in the early morning of April 25th. I went immediately to the telegraph office and wired William A. Howard when I would arrive in Detroit, and for him to have land warrants, money, and a good horse and buggy ready for me to leave Detroit immediately on my arrival for Ionia Land Office, 125 miles distant from Detroit, as I was closely chased by the canal folks. Taking fresh horses at Flint, we reached Pontiac, some 40 miles distant, and remained there overnight. On the morning of the 26th, we soon passed over the Detroit and Pontiac Strap Railroad to Detroit. Here John left me for Port Huron. On arrival at Detroit, Howard had ready for me land warrants, money, lunch, and a good bottom tough stout speedy livery horse and light top buggy. At 11:30 a.m., I left Detroit, traveling over a new plank road at a fair trotting gait, a distance of 85 miles to Lansing, eating my lunch as I rode along and occasionally watering my horse at the toll gates. Night came on, and on I went, passing gate after gate. Midnight came, no rest for the horse, nor sleep for me. Tired and sleepy as I was, and still on without change of horse I went. Finally, in the east, I spied the welcome golden spring morning light, and soon the sun appeared, and I arrived in Lansing at 6:00 in time for breakfast and to take the regular daily stage to Ionia, a distance of 40 miles. I had driven from Detroit to Lansing, a distance of 85 miles in 18 hours, the horse having had no feed nor I any sleep. I gave orders to have my horse well taken care of, and when properly rested, returned to Detroit. This was done, the horse proving not to have been injured by the drive. At 8:00 I was aboard the stage on my way to Ionia, and on reaching there at about 5:30 p.m., I immediately repaired to the United States Land Office, found the Land Office receiver, Frederick Hall, at the office, gave him my selected pine land list of descriptions, with land warrants and money to purchase the same, which he locked up in the Land Office safe overnight. The rule and practice were that the first applicant's list presented with purchasing funds excluded all subsequently presented lists. All now being safe for the morning's work, Fred Hall observed to me, "I never saw you look so tired, jaded, and worn out. Go to the hotel, eat your supper, then go directly to bed and sleep as long as you can. Then come to the office in the morning, and I will be ready for the work of entering your applied descriptions of land. Doing as ordered, my mind being free from anxiety, I slept like a log until 7 o'clock next morning. On arising, my head felt heavy, dull, and tired, but on eating my breakfast, my mind began to revive, and I worked continuously all day with the receiver and got all of my certificates of purchase perfected and in my side pocket about 5 o'clock p.m. About 20 minutes later, a horse reeking with sweat, foam, and steam from overdriving was driven up in front of the land office by the Soo Canal purchasing agent of Detroit. On his coming directly into the office, he handed his list of land applications to Receiver Hall and then stepped and took down the books containing the maps of the townships I had made my purchases in and turned them over leisurely but said nothing. On my looking up at Hall, his countenance glowed with satisfaction and pleasure. I need not tell you that my feelings more than harmonized with his. I returned soon after to my hotel, slept soundly that night, and on the morning of the 29th of April, I left by stage for Lansing. The next morning, the 30th of April, I left Lansing by the Detroit and Lansing Plank Road stage, which by frequent changes of horses landed me in Detroit the same evening. On the morning of the 1st of May, I left on the daily steamboat for Port Huron, having completed my long-continued severe journey and the purchase at Ionia of some 16,000 acres. Some 6 weeks after I made this large purchase at Ionia, I had notice from Commissioner Wilson of the General Land Office at Washington that all of my purchases had been canceled for the reason that Congress had a short time previous to my purchasing passed an act setting off the part of the district where my entries were located to a new made land district. After considering the subject and consulting Howard and Dwight, I left for Washington for the first time with the view of obtaining a relief act from Congress making valid my purchases. General Land Commissioner Wilson wrote out such a bill for me, and the next day, by suspending the rules, General Lewis Cass, senator from Michigan, got it through the Senate, and then the succeeding day I gave it to Congressman Hester Stevens to move its passage through the House. But there it stuck, as private bills usually do, and never passed that body. But the Commissioner of the Land Office, being fair and kind, allowed me 18 months' time to receive my money and warrants back and to re-enter the lands at the new land office located at Sheboygan. For some years afterward, pine land owners used to laugh and try to irritate me by intimating that it was folly to buy pine land away off up on the headwaters of the Ausable and Manistee River regions, where the pine and timber would never be wanted in our time. After hearing this song several times and knowing that there was still a considerable amount of good pine land up in that region that I did not own, but might if opportunity offered thereafter, I seemingly fell in with their ideas. Then they laughed heartily at my conceited misjudgment, saying for some years after that Ward had finally confessed that he had made a fool of himself in buying pine land not wanted for generations to come. Notwithstanding the confession, I quietly looked and had looked up afterwards from time to time all the pine land in that region that my limited means would purchase. Years passed on. The Jackson, Lansing, and Saginaw Railroad, now a part of the Michigan Central System, was constructed up through that region, running alongside of Bradford and Otsego Lakes to Sheboygan and Old Mackinac. On the heels of this railroad construction, those envious parties sent their landlookers post-haste over the region of the headwaters of the Ausable, who on returning informed their patrons that they found any amount of good cork pine in that region, but Ward had got it all. Thenceforward, the sentiment and the tone seemed to change, as my friends often heard the Ward critics declare in indignant tones that Ward had made a damned hog of himself. Ward kept quiet and let them enjoy their change of sentiment and feeling alone. This was certainly an extraordinary adventure that David Ward and John Baily and their crew of packers went on in March of 1854 for Ward and Baily, continuing on into the end of April. However, this was not unusual for the work of a landlooker or timber cruiser to go out into the forest to look for the pines. The cork pine that he mentioned throughout was the highest quality of white pine. At the beginning of the podcast this season, you learned a little bit about the white pine and just how excellent it was for lumbering purposes. And you'll certainly hear more about that throughout the podcast. So this was an unusual adventure, to say the least, because of the extremes that Ward went through, and the fact that he was in competition with another timber cruiser, Addison Brewer, who had not only been working for the St. Mary's Falls Shipping Canal Company, what he calls the Soo Canal Company throughout, but he had also been the original land surveyor for Michigan for this area after we had reached statehood. So Brewer really knew exactly where this pine was. So he just had to go out there physically again and list it to register it. And unfortunately, he got beat to it by David Ward. So this was certainly, as I mentioned, rather atypical for what they went through. But it was not that far off, though, of what they did. They usually went through mostly uneventful, happening either in the wintertime when it was easier to get through the swamps, or in the summertime when they had to deal with wet swamps, with mosquitoes, or areas when it was really dry, lack of water. So they always had hardships they had to go through. One last note here, mention that they did get 16,000 acres that they had registered in there that he purchased. And this was 1854. That was cost of $1.25 per acre. And that seems very, very cheap to us now. And that was $20,000 was the cost of that purchase for 16,000 acres. But that's 1854 money. I did look up an inflation calculator, and I'll have details in the notes, or in the notes on the episode. But in today's dollars, that would be approximately $756,000 that $20,000 were valued at. And David Ward had $3,000 of his own dollars to contribute. That doesn't sound like very much, even out of the $20,000, but that was, for one individual, $113,454. So he had enough money on his own that he could do some purchasing, but certainly not to get all $16,000. So it was important to have partners involved with this. And in this case of other lumbermen, as I mentioned, the Dwight Smith and Company and William A. Howard, both were lumber businessmen, and also were involved in this private bank. I think that probably catered to other lumbermen, such as Ward, and giving them loans for land purchases. And then they were paid back, and probably sometimes that the lumber was traded hands. So some of this land that Ward purchased, if he decided not to log it himself, he might make a purchase to William Howard or to the Dwight Smith and Company, and they could then profit from that instead. Just a last thought here on Addison Brewer. I mentioned he was originally the land surveyor for the St. Mary's Falls Shipping Canal Company, for the state, and then the timber cruiser for the St. Mary's Falls Shipping Canal Company, the Soo Canal Company. But he knew this land, as I said, and was involved in not just in the survey of this region of along Otsego and Bradford lakes in Otsego County, but the land that's now Hartwick Pine State Park. He did the original land survey for that area. And that land was originally owned then by the Soo Canal Company. So their payment for the digging of the Soo Canal, the locks there at Sault Ste. Marie, was land grants by the state of Michigan, because the federal government was not interested in it at that time. Of course, now the Corps of Engineers operates it for the government, for the federal government. But so Brewer had his hand on many things in this area, and I'm sure we will revisit him again in the podcast, just like I'm sure we will revisit David Ward. But I just wanted to give this short episode today to kind of put into prospect of what was happening at this time of the year in lumber, in the logging in the forest in Michigan. The timber cruising. I think you can tell by the weather that it would have been a difficult time for them to be logging with the melt that they were happening there in April. So timber cruising could take place. And then on the rivers, with the melt and the thaw they were having, it would be time for the breakup of the ice, and they could start moving the logs downriver. Ward doesn't mention at all any coming across any logging teams, just other surveyors, other timber cruisers. So this area, of course, not up where he was land looking, because as I said in there, it was too far away for anybody to give it a thought. But even down along the Tobacco and Tittabawassee River, he doesn't mention about going around log booms or having any log drives happening while he was going through there. So we'll explore the timetable in that area of logging and the forest history at another date. So thank you for listening. There may be another 1 or 2 special episodes that will happen between now and June, but do stay tuned June 2nd for the debut of Season 2 of North Country History with Rob Berg. Thanks again for listening. And as always, like this, subscribe, leave a review, and tell a friend. It's the best way to keep this channel growing. Thanks again, and have a good day. Bye. North Country History with Rob Berg is hosted, written, and produced by Rob Berg. Music is Crack o' Dawn, performed by Reveille, licensed through Soundstripe. Follow North Country History with Rob Berg on YouTube and on Facebook at Rob Berg, Environmental Historian.